Red 13 is often overlooked when talking about Final Fantasy VII as nothing more than a furry companion, the goodest fire boy that also happens to be able to talk. But this couldn't be further from the truth. In a world of super soldiers, guns, mechanical battlesuits, and stones called materia that allow people to cast magic, a talking dog quickly begins to shine as one of the most likable of all the characters. Apart from possibly Yuffie, a literal child, and Barrett, whose entire character is based upon his presence as a father to Marlene, both equally personable and relatable traits meriting their own separate analyses. And this, I think, is intentional. That a pet, a child, and a father be those that elicit the most emotion out of us, as these are all things near and dear to our hearts. So why discuss Red 13 specifically? Because Red 13 is the most relatable story of them all. Trials of hardship, tests of friendship, and a deep anxiety to fulfill what is expected of you when you don't know if you can achieve it yourself. It's worth noting that, before we jump into this discussion, that this analysis will contain the discussion of some spoilers related to Red 13's story, including the post-credit scene of the original game. That being said, I won't discuss any major plot points of the story of either game, and only note that which are specifically related to Red 13. You have been warned. With that out of the way, let's discuss why I find Red 13 to be the most human of all characters in Final Fantasy VII. But before we can do a deep dive, we first have to start at the beginning. Who is Red 13? To begin with, Red 13 isn't just a dog or a wolf, he's a beast. A monster of the wilds whose species befriended humans generations ago and learned to speak our language. As a result of this, and unlike our other heroes, Red 13 doesn't need weapons. By claw and by fang, he rends his enemies asunder, all while bearing an innate talent for magic as many beasts of the world do, capable wholly on his own merits of standing with the party. In the original Final Fantasy VII, his magical connection is further reinforced by finding the enemy skill materia found immediately following the recruitment of Red 13, which I have always interpreted to mean that this was intended for him, derived from the very experiments he endured under the evil scientist Hojo. I mention this as the enemy skill materia is particularly unique amongst spellcasting materia in the game, as it does not get stronger through AP, the game's equivalent to experience for these stones, but rather by being struck by specific enemy abilities which allow the holder to learn the skill, to then be used back upon their foes. This, ironically, would imply that our Red 13 is somewhat of a canonical blue mage, who learns spells precisely in this fashion. But this method of learning spells is beautifully aligned with Red. It speaks to Red 13's adaptability, learning the skills of his foes and unleashing them back with his own ferocity. This adaptability is core to who Red 13 is as a character, which becomes clear as we learn more of him as the game progresses. But it's also his greatest source of uncertainty, and the source of conflict found within him. While we never witness Red 13's childhood in full throughout the game, we learn of his past in bits and pieces, scattered in a somewhat haphazard manner, further complicated by the fact that Red 13 himself is an untrustworthy narrator to his own story, actively deceiving the party from the moment they meet. Red 13 initially joins the party as an ally of convenience, being freed from Hojo's laboratory as the group stumbles upon him whilst trying to rescue another party member. In neither game is his deception immediately clear, and in Final Fantasy Remake, Red 13 speaks in a gruff, serious tone with the party to portray his serious and brooding nature.
A fascinating question.
But this is a lie. Although Red 13 is 48 years old, we learn later that this is quite young for his species, and Red 13 is factually only 15 or 16 years old when compared to a human lifespan, and is expected to live for at least 500. Even his name is a lie, a persona he has chosen to adopt after being the victim of Hojo's cruel experiments. It isn't until the party returns to Cosmo Canyon much later in the game that Red 13 cannot maintain this charade any longer, too excited to finally return home. His true name being revealed as Nanaki, destined since birth to be the Great Watcher of the Veil, a sacred protector of his homeland from evil spirits known as the Gi. Red 13 was abducted by the Turks from his home in Cosmo Canyon as he attempted to prove himself against a rival. Hojo simply named him for his color and branded him with his experiment number in the lab, Red 13. This unveiling of his character is not as sudden as it seems, however, and those who pay close attention to the game will catch glimpses along the way. From the moment Red 13 joins the party, his personality slowly begins to falter, letting his childish side shine through. For example, in Final Fantasy Rebirth, we see Red 13 don a guard costume to disguise himself whilst amongst humans so that he doesn't have to stay in the cargo hold for pets while on the cruise liner. However, he's unable to resist playing Queen's Blood, a card game introduced in Rebirth. The call of fun too alluring. As he has difficulty walking on two legs, he finds it best achieved and least suspicious to walk by dancing, a comedically childish decision for a character which, at that point, is still assumed to be a fierce and serious man. In the original, a similar scene occurs in Costa del Sol after disembarking from said cruise, as Red 13 blends in by accidentally playing ball in the street with children while in disguise, his tail acting on its own accord and dribbling the ball. And so, Red 13 is shown to be a boy, unable to continue to be a stern man, as it is not yet who he is, who is riddled with angst. And this is an important aspect of Red 13's personality. Red 13 has had two lives impressed upon him: the gruff and stern Red 13, victim of Hojo and man destined for something greater, and the boy, Nanaki, who simply just wants to be a boy. Red's angst is further developed as we learn more of his relationship with his father. Red 13 was born in Cosmo Canyon to an unnamed mother and his father, Seto, the previous Watcher of the Veil. An invasion by the Gi tribe occurred in the same year of his birth, and Seto had gone missing, which Nanaki assumed his father had fled, leaving his mother in the face of the invasion. It's not until much later that it's revealed to Nanaki by his grandfather that Seto had not fled. In completing the trial to become the new Watcher of the Veil formally, Nanaki discovers the petrified body of Seto, who alone stood his ground and fought the Gi, but was turned to stone by their poisoned arrows. Absolved of the shame for his father, Nanaki vows to become a great warrior like Seto, and howls at the moon. And this, I think, is the most relatable character trait of Nanaki: his angst. A teenager pretending to be more mature than they are in the face of adversity so as to impress others is something which I believe we've all experienced, at least to any who've experienced teenage angst, which, if you haven't, I'll have whatever you're having. A grand destiny that awaits us, one that we don't feel prepared for. Nanaki is still maturing and grappling with anxiety, which he aspires to outgrow. Nanaki speaks often about his desires for adulthood, which he initially imagines to mean becoming a warrior who protects Cosmo Canyon and who is unafraid. But it's this very desire that led to his capture, as him stepping up to prove himself to a rival allowed the Turks to capture him, and also led him to resent his father, who he had believed had cowardly neglected his duties. Learning otherwise greatly affected Nanaki, and led him to see his greater duties to protect the planet, as it was the most efficient means of also protecting Cosmo Canyon. This is a heartbreaking story of a boy who had to grow up too soon. And to me, this is certainly the most relatable when compared to the motivations of the other characters, who are largely motivated to seek justice against the great and evil Sephiroth. But Red 13? He continues to be driven by this crucial duality of his character. To follow them, as it is the best means for him to fulfill his duties as Watcher of the Veil, and also just to help his friends, wanting to follow them as it's the right thing to do. And so I ask again, who is Red 13? Is he the fierce beast, or the young boy? The game certainly doesn't help solve this question. Even after uncovering his true identity, the party continues to call him Red 13, and the game does not give you the option to change it. Furthermore, Red 13 himself doesn't protest to this change, signaling perhaps that by this point, Nanaki and Red 13 have become more at peace with one another, and he's fine with remaining as the latter. And so, while this concludes Red 13's story developments from within the main games, this begins an entirely separate problem for him, one that's unknown to most fans of the series. There exists a Final Fantasy VII book containing a series of short stories called On the Way to a Smile, which bridges the timeline between the conclusion of Final Fantasy VII and the film Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, one of which named for our boy Nanaki. But before I continue, I think now's a good time to look at Red 13's visual design. As a beast, and through his vaguely indigenous attire, Red 13's design clearly evokes a strong connection with the planet, a major theme throughout the entirety of the game. But embroiling such human emotions into what is so visually distinct as not being human cements this idea that the human spirit is one with the planet itself, inseparable and enduring. Returning to the short story episode Nanaki, it is revealed within that despite Nanaki potentially having come to terms with his identity as Red 13, Nanaki begins to struggle with the inherent conflict between being physically a feral beast yet acting human. dreading the experience of a great amount of loss as a result of his species' longevity. This loneliness and sense of longing in his heart he begins to call Gilligan. It is here where Red 13 begins to bond with Vincent Valentine, the only other member of the party who is immortal, who assures him that Gilligan was his fear of loss and loneliness that would come with living a long life, and encouraged him, saying he may one day have children of his own to keep him from being lonely. The two agree to reconvene in Midgar every year for the remainder of Nanaki's life, where Nanaki could tell Vincent the stories of his travels. And here, our story at last has a happy ending. Far beyond the end of the series and witnessed as a post-credit scene to the original game in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, Red 13 arrives in a precipice overlooking the overgrown Midgar ruins with two young cubs. The three dash through a canyon and climb up to the crest of a cliff to look down at the remains of Midgar, now covered in moss and trees while a flock of birds flies by. As the scene fades, the sound of distant children's laughter is heard, with Vincent's promises ringing true. It's no surprise then that Red 13 was designed to live for some 500 years, a symbol of both humankind and beasthood, and is equally fitting knowing while everything else may remain uncertain, after several hundred years have passed, Red 13 not only survived, but is thriving with children of his own, much like humanity does from the sound of the children laughing. To further cement Red 13's human ties, it's also worth noting that Red 13 appears to be the only character of the series with a common character trait and goal with almost every single other character of the party by the conclusion of his story arc. Like Cloud, he suffers from an uncertainty of his identity. Like Tifa, he's dedicated to his friends to a fault and journeys with them for no other reason than that. Like Barrett, he aspires to be a parent and cares deeply for his family. Like Aerith, he is connected to the planet and cares greatly for its future. Like Yuffie, he has something to prove to himself and his homeland. Like Cait Sith, he leads a double life, and like Vincent Valentine, he is immortal. The sole party member lacking is Sid Highwind, who has no real motivation to join the party at all. He's an antithesis to all the other party members, as he was largely bored and just joined, in his own words, as he has nothing better to do, which is a fascinating deep dive on its own accord. And so, to conclude, let us revisit our initial question one last time. Who is Red 13? Is he Nanaki, or is he Red 13? And personally, I think he's both. And much in that same way, is he a beast, or is he human? And again, I think he's both. And so, if you're ever playing Final Fantasy VII, don't forget to pay special attention to our bestest little boy. The way he smiles, jokes, laughs, cries, and dances with the rest of the party, and how much more relatable that is than most any other character in the game, and just how human he can be. Hey everyone, that essay was kind of a practice of how I could get better at video editing. I'm not very good and I'm stuck editing only on a phone, and let me tell you, that was a ever-loving nightmare. I hope you enjoyed it. I will probably make more videos like that, hopefully after I get an actual kind of editing PC, but otherwise, yeah, I hope my pain and suffering was totally worth it for your enjoyment, and that you guys enjoyed that deep dive into Red 13, one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters of all time, really. So, yeah, thank you so much for checking out the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content, and otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!